Hi everybody, this is Dr. Sullivan coming to you with our second version of I Care for Your Brain live on Facebook every Wednesday night at 6 o'clock. Sorry for starting a little bit late. Of course, there's technical difficulties every time you try to do something like this. Let me re-welcome everyone and let me tell you again about what it is we're going to be doing here in our special time together. I want to have meaningful conversations to you about brain health, things that matter to me, things that matter to you and your family, people that care about you. And I want us to be able to have a direct line of communication. I see a lot of people every day in my practice in North Carolina, which is a job I absolutely love, but I also wanted to be able to extend my reach out into more of the larger community and talk directly to people about issues that I know are important. One of the problems that's going on right now in the world of brain health is that there is a lot of misinformation and a general lack of high quality scientific information. And I've been really lucky to go to some absolutely amazing training programs and have a really spectacular education that I'm really proud of, thanks to many different people and many different years of support. And I feel a responsibility to share this information with you in order to help you and other people that you know become more informed consumers of brain health news. So I thought there's no better way than to go directly to the people with Facebook Live. Coming in October, I'm going to be telling you about the I Care for the Brain program in a lot more detail. We're still working out some of the details, but I want to let you know very soon, probably even next Wednesday, about exactly how it is you can access that program. I have been offering it down here in North Carolina for about the last year in a local retirement community called Peanut Village, and I've been doing it live once a month with people who live in this community, and it's been awesome. It's been really fun. It's been really successful, and we're starting up again at the end of the month, and we actually had to add a whole nother presentation time per day because we were selling out, and we had probably about 300 seats in this room. So because I had such good feedback from the in-person version, I wanted to also offer it up online so, like I said, more people can access the information. When we were together last time, we talked about dementia, what its definition is, how is it that it gets diagnosed, what are some of the medications, and that was because I hadn't had a chance to get input from all of you on topics and what it is we should be talking about. So what I did at the end of the last broadcast was I opened up a survey in the comments section of the last broadcast and asked people to vote on 4 different topics, and my job was to pick the top 2 most voted topics to talk about tonight. And that's what we're going to do. So you all out there in internet land picked what is the best diet or the best foods for the brain, and what, if any, supplements should I be considering to take that may help me with my brain functioning, my memory, maybe even prevent or reverse dementia. Okay, so let's get started talking about food and the brain. Now, I think it's important to have this conversation from the bottom up, because you have to really know where someone is at with their personal diet before you start making recommendations. We have people out there that are eating absolutely amazing 100% plant-based diets, and for them this conversation would be different. We also have people that are eating a ton of processed foods and don't really understand the impact of things like sugar on the brain, and maybe we would have to help them at a different level of intervention. So I think that the very first thing we want to talk about is something really basic, but it's actually overlooked, and sometimes it's just the simple common sense things that we need to remind ourselves of. So the first thing I want to talk about is hydration. We have to make sure that we are drinking enough water and non-sugar based liquids every day. There are many problems that older adults have due to dehydration. It can really disrupt the electrolytes in the brain, and anytime someone's sodium or potassium gets below a certain level, they can have altered mental status and even have things like seizures, or it can actually look like the person has dementia when really they're having something more related to their brain chemistry being temporarily a little bit thrown off. So the first thing you want to do is very simple, but again, many times we're not on top of this important part of our health, and that's just to make sure you're getting enough water every day. So typically we think of about 6 to 8 glasses of high quality water a day. So that's just a great place to start. There's a lot of fad diets out there, and when you look at the science of brain health, there's really only one diet plan that has really passed the tough standards of scientific efficacy that I would feel comfortable passing along to all of you to talk about, and that's a diet called the MIND diet, M-A-I-N-D. And I wonder how many of you out there have heard of this diet. It's actually a little bit of a mashup between 2 different diets that have been on the market for some time. The first one is the Mediterranean diet, which many of us have heard of. And it's a combination of that with something called the DASH diet, D-A-S-H, which is a dietary intervention to bring down high blood pressure or hypertension. So in 2015, there was a doctor, an epidemiologist, who decided maybe we could hybrid these 2 diet approaches together and we could really get somewhere in terms of not just treating memory problems when they exist, but wouldn't it really be awesome if we could prevent Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common type of dementia, in people with a dietary intervention. So that's what her and her team did. And MIND stands for Mediterranean Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay, okay? Mediterranean Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay, pardon me. And I want to talk to you about what exactly that diet is. I get a lot of different questions about what I should eat, what I shouldn't eat, and again, I think it's really unique for each person. You have to know exactly where that person is starting. But I want to offer these to you as just a general rule because these are tried and true, scientifically tested recommendations that have been proven to slow down or even prevent Alzheimer's disease in people that are prone to get it. So let's just go over the diet in a little bit of detail. Okay, the first thing that I want you to know is even though there has been a lot of research on this diet, there actually aren't any set guidelines right now. So what they do is they offer you some general guidelines, and the idea is that you try to incorporate as much of these foods in your diet as possible. There's 10 that they really support and they really want you to try to get in your diet. And then there's also a handful of foods that they really want you to avoid. And I think this is actually a good approach because it's realistic. We know that people cannot stick with strict diets for a long period of time. It either gets boring or it's too rigid and they can't be out in the real world. It's really easy to do in your home, but you might not be able to do it in a restaurant. So what they've offered is some loose guidelines, but they are pretty clear once we get into them, that if you know about them and you understand the science behind them, my idea is you're going to be more motivated to want to incorporate them into your everyday eating. So what we're going to do now is talk about the 10 foods that they recommend that you try to get into your diet every single day. The first one that we're going to talk about is green leafy vegetables. And this is another one of those common sense things where I think we all know, sure, that looks like something that's really healthy, but when you understand that it's not just good for your body, it's not just going to help you lose weight and look good, but it's also going to be good for your brain and the cellular functioning in your brain, I think it provides you with an extra level of motivation to maybe want to eat these foods. So the foods that they recommend are 6 servings per week of things like kale, spinach, cooked greens, and salad. So they don't make a difference between cooking them, having them raw. A variety of green foods is really what the recommendation calls for. So you want to just try to find it at every turn, incorporate a little bit into your diet every day, but remember what they're really calling for is about 6 or more per week. So the bottom lower standard would be 6. The next food that they strongly recommend are all the other vegetables, okay? But what they say is that you maybe need a little bit less of these vegetables. Green leafy vegetables are kind of the king and queen in this system, okay? So all the other vegetables, you can use your imagination what that is and really try to make sure you're incorporating your favorite vegetables. They do recommend, though, that you want to try to avoid non-starchy vegetables because many times in the body, those simply convert into simple sugars, which one of the main problems with brain health is when people have blood sugar levels, glucose levels, that spike up really high and go down really far, specifically within a couple hours. If someone has type 2 diabetes, or type 1 diabetes for that matter, most people I see in my practice of older adults concerned about the brain have type 2. The real damage comes when blood sugar levels go up really high and come down really low. I would prefer someone's run a little bit high on a regular basis or run a little bit low than in the morning check their sugars and they're at 180, and in the afternoon they check them and they're at 60. That really damages the inside lining of the blood vessels that run throughout the body, and the smaller blood vessels have a really, really hard time with this and can become damaged pretty quickly. So steady blood sugar levels, lower blood sugar levels are one of the #1 things that you can do to help your brain. So remember, all vegetables are good, but you want to try to avoid those that have a relatively high starch level. So that's actually things like carrots and corn. The next food that they recommend are berries, and I think that these foods have definitely made it to the mainstream. It's probably the only one of the few mainstream brain health fads that I get behind, because there's really strong scientific evidence to support that that's actually correct and a good thing to do. So the studies have mostly been done with blueberries, but common sense tells us that that same ingredient that helps the blueberries be blue also helps the blackberries be dark purple, helps the grapes be purple, helps the strawberries be red. Any berry is thought to be very, very good for your brain health. So a lot of people like to incorporate berries into their morning breakfast, and a lot of us feel that that's a great way to start the day. What we know is that these berries also have very strong antioxidant properties, which are really good for your overall health. And remember, one of the rules of the I Care for the Brain program is that it's actually not just about your brain. You have to be thinking about physical health, social health, spiritual health. All these different aspects of health come together. It's not just about you and your brain. We can't isolate the brain from the rest of health. So all of these foods probably also have very strong cardiovascular benefits, and that's great. Heart health absolutely equals brain health. The next thing we're going to talk about are nuts. Now, nuts are funny because sometimes people feel that they have too much saturated fat in them, so they try to avoid them. Other people, I think, kind of go a little bit whole hog with the nuts because they are so good, and maybe they eat a little bit more than they should. So the idea is that nuts give you a healthy version of fat that your brain absolutely needs in order to function. So the idea with the Mind Diet is you want to try to get 5 servings or more per week of nuts. Now, the best study that's been done on nuts has focused on walnuts, and the creators of the Mind Diet don't actually differentiate between any of the nuts. They don't promote any specific nut. But in general, we know that raw nuts are going to be better than the ones that are roasted and that have a lot of oil and salt on them. So I particularly love, my family really loves raw cashews. They're a great thing to snack on. The next thing we're going to talk about is olive oil. This is a staple of the Mediterranean diet, and anybody who's been following that for the last 10 or 15 years absolutely knows this. So the idea is that you want to try to use as little oil as you possibly can when cooking, and really use a good quality olive oil that you don't heat up, say putting it in a salad or on some vegetables, something like that. Whole grains is the second food that they promote in the Mind Diet. And what they talk about is at least 3 servings of whole grains per day. So just getting back to breakfast for a second, a really, really good breakfast is actually oatmeal with berries. Another whole grain that's gotten a lot of press recently is flax seeds, and there actually is a very well-designed study that showed in postmenopausal women that flax seeds in breakfast cereal every morning was really efficient in reducing blood pressure. Now again, this isn't a direct study looking at the brain, but if we kind of connect the dots in a common sense way, we know that high blood pressure is probably the #1 risk factor for stroke in both men and women. So anything that we can do to help the blood pressure, to help the vascular system, is actually really going to be good for your brain as well. The next one on the MIND diet is fish, and what they talk about is eating 1 serving of fish per week. Now fish, again, we wish this was all very straightforward and I could just give you these very clear guidelines. It's not quite that easy. So what you have to know about fish is that there's big concerns about fish in terms of minerals and heavy metals that may be in fish, not naturally, but as a function of the ocean not being as clean as it should be and having way too many chemicals in it. So people initially started off with fish talking about, well, you want to get fresh caught, wild caught. You don't want something that is from a fish farm. And that's probably still the case, but you also run into difficulty, particularly with larger fish, with having too much mercury, which is not good for your brain at all. So what the guidelines recommend is that you actually try to eat smaller fish. The idea with the big fish, again, kind of common sense, is that they're eating all the little fish. So they're accumulating more and more fish within themselves, which then you go on to eat, which has some of the mercury in it. So the idea is that the little guys like the sardines, even up to as big as a salmon, aren't necessarily eating as much as, say, a tuna. So the recommendation from MIND is that at least once a week you try to incorporate fish into your diet. Now, of course, you don't want to have fried fish, right? You want to try to keep it healthy. But the idea is that there's some omega-3 fatty acids in fish that are really, really good for your brain. The next one is beans, one of my personal favorites, being a longtime vegetarian. And what they talk about is at least 4 meals per week should incorporate a bean, should showcase a bean, which is really great because beans are really, really healthy. There's a lot of protein in beans. There's very little fat in beans. If you eat them properly, there's very little sodium. Soaking your own beans is actually really easy. I didn't realize that for many years and just had them out of the can, but actually soaking them overnight, it's kind of a fun project. So this is a great time of year to start thinking about making bean soups. It's really filling, it's low calorie, and overall definitely a good choice for the brain. So this would include anything from black beans to lentils to soybeans. The next one that they recommend, and I would say that this is a little bit controversial, is they do recommend some animal product above and beyond fish, which is chicken or turkey. And they talk about this maybe about twice a week. Now, of course, it's funny, they do make a recommendation to make sure you're not using fried chicken, but I think you guys are well past that. You know that's not a good idea. But I think that there's also a lot of strong evidence to support a vegetarian or a vegan diet, and that's really a longer conversation for a different day. And I just told you guys I happen to be a vegetarian, but I don't in any way judge people that eat meat. I think to each his own, and everybody has different reasons for wanting to make that choice. But I definitely think there's some solid evidence correlating saturated fat through animal products with all sorts of not so great health outcomes, particularly for cardiovascular health, which then in turn goes on to affect dementia. So I think that's a little bit of a controversial recommendation. And again, we're going to talk about that in a lot more detail. This next one is not controversial at all, and a lot of people love when I start talking about wine. So the recommendation for the MIND diet is 1 glass of wine per day. Now, when we're talking about alcohol, we absolutely have to talk about the size of your glass, because I learned this lesson very early on in being a doctor that interviews people about their alcohol intake. And so I got fooled a couple times just saying, oh, how much do you drink? Oh, I drink maybe 1 a day. Well, eventually someone took me aside and said, you might want to ask my husband about what size glass he's drinking the wine of. And it turns out it was a big old soda glass. So what they're talking about here is like a 3 to 4 ounce of wine per day. And the idea is that with wine particularly, that there are some phytonutrients in there that are really, really good for your brain. There's also some research that suggests maybe the benefit is actually from all types of alcohol, and the idea is that it opens up your blood vessels a little bit so more blood and oxygen can flow through. It just so happens that red wine probably due to some behind the scenes lobbying, actually got itself involved with those studies. There was actually a researcher who got brought up on some fraud charges a couple years ago because it turned out he had some stock in a winery in which their wine was incorporated into the research study. Because think about it, when a doctor starts to tell you how great wine is, boy, you feel like you've really got carte blanche to go for it. Probably brain scientists think the same thing actually holds true for any kind of alcohol. The key is that you really just don't want to overdo it. There's a J-shaped curve, as they call it in science, for the benefits of alcohol. So people who drink no alcohol don't seem to get any of the benefits. People who drink too much alcohol don't get any of the benefits. And there's really this sweet spot in the middle that people consider to be one healthy, modest glass of alcohol per day. The other recommendation from Mind is that they encourage people to not use butter and margarine. They really would like people to just use that olive oil and to avoid those heavy saturated fats. They want to make sure that if people are going to use these very dense animal fats, that people use them sparingly and use them with a sense of awareness that this is, treat it like a real treat, almost like you would a piece of cake. It's not something that you want to have in your diet every single day. The last one, and this one hurts, is recommending that you only consume cheese one time per week. And I think that's pretty painful to many of us, but this is what they say. The last couple have to do with things that I think most people know are no-nos. So no fried food, especially the kind that you would get from any kind of fast food restaurant. And they say if you have to have it, put it down to once a week or less. And the next one, of course, is things like pastry, anything to do with processed food where the three first main ingredients are sugar, flour, and some kind of dairy, either milk or butter. That's really a recipe for not so good cardiovascular health, which of course goes on to affect brain health. So that is the Mind diet in a nutshell. If you want to know more about it, I absolutely encourage you to become your own brain scientist. That's one of the underlying promises that I'm making to you in this program, is that I really want to invite you into start thinking like someone who is trained in brain health to start making better decisions. Okay, we're going to have one last brief conversation before we go, because I promised to talk about supplements, which is simultaneously one of my favorite conversations and one of my biggest pet peeves. Now, just because of the short time we have together, we're not going to go full-blown into this topic, but the bottom line for me is that there is no supplement on the market today, not one single one, that has a level of scientific proof that would allow me to feel comfortable in recommending it to my patients. Now, of course, I'm open-minded enough to realize that there's certainly some compounds out there, whether herb, some kind of vitamin, whatever, that may have aspects of its properties that may be really, really healthy. But the bottom line is science has not proven it yet. We get into trouble with supplements because A, people think because they're natural, they're surely healthy and wouldn't cause me any harm. Number two, they're not mandated through the FDA process, so we have no way of judging whether or not their claims are accurate or even if they're safe. The number three problem is people always have this mentality like more must be better, and we often see this. Melatonin is actually a classic example of this. So what the research tells us about melatonin is that the lowest milligram possible is actually the most helpful. Now, the best studies that I know of have been done with older adult people who report insomnia. And they gave them 1 milligram, 3 milligrams, and it was either 5 or 10 milligrams. And most people, when asked, would say, well, when I go into the grocery store, I see that they have the 3 and the 5. Well, of course I'm going to pick the 5, because if 3 is there, I really want to get a good night's sleep. Why not go straight for the 5? But what the research shows us is actually the 1 milligram gets people to sleep quicker and helps them stay asleep longer. So that is music to my ears, because what it tells us is it breaks through that stereotype that more is always better. And there was actually a very large, well-controlled study that supported that the 1 milligram actually worked, okay? The other supplements that have kind of gone by the wayside in recent years our ginkgo biloba. If you've been around long enough and you care about the brain, you've definitely heard of that. That was really popular for a while. I feel like that's been replaced by some other things. Scientific evidence to support ginkgo biloba. Fish oil was one I wanted to talk about. That's a really interesting one because there actually is some, I would say, some scientific support for that as a supplement. But what happened was they initially found kind of like an accidental relationship between fish oil and better brain functioning, and people kind of filled in the gaps and assumed that this should be a formal recommendation. Basically, they were looking at people who had healthy brains and they tested their blood and they found that they had higher levels of omega-3 fatty acids in their blood, and so there was this idea that, oh, this must be from eating fish and these people have healthier brains. That's the problem we get in when marketers look at very small scientific studies and make big extrapolations from them. And really, this is at the heart of a lot of the brain fitness industry problem right now, is that they tout that it has a scientific basis, that there's been a research study that's proven that it works. But if you aren't informed to understand how to interpret the quality of the research study, it's really easy to get caught up in their claims. And now it may be that there's a kernel of truth in what it is that they're offering, but my problem is that they make these big giant promises that in no way, shape, or form can possibly be true. So supplements get me kind of riled up because they make promises like we can reverse your dementia, we can treat Alzheimer's disease. One thing I can promise you is that if there was a supplement or a vitamin or an herb that was able to do this, that was this powerful, a pharmaceutical company with billions of dollars would swoop in and buy it so fast, and you would need it from prescription, that there's no way you're going to get it over the counter. So that's kind of your first tip off. The other thing is that you really have to become educated and look at what is the foundation, what is the information that they're using to make these claims, okay? So in general, in my practice, I don't recommend any supplements except if you are experiencing a vitamin deficiency, something like anemia, vitamin B deficiency, or vitamin D deficiency. That's kind of a whole nother world. That's a medical problem that has to be treated. Where I get concerned is that when people come to see me, they write a list of over-the-counter medications and prescription medications for me to look at. And when I start looking at the amount of money that's being spent on these over-the-counter supplements that are for brain health, for memory care, I just can't help it. I just get so kind of aggravated because I just know that it's an absolute waste of money. And if you know me or you know a little bit about this I Care for Your Brain program, it's really trying to combat all of this misinformation that's out there, because I truly believe that most of it is a waste of your time, your money, your resources, your hope. So we're going to get into supplements in a lot more detail in a future full-length lecture, which is a little bit of a sneak peek of what you can expect from this program in the next couple of weeks. But that's all we have time for right now. I want to thank you so much for listening again. I hope that you're sharing this information with people that you care about, maybe people that are going out and are buying a lot of these over-the-counters. I think that it's also dangerous from an interaction standpoint between prescribed medications. A lot of times older adults don't tell their medical providers the over-the-counters that they take. And remember, just because the FDA isn't mandating and managing these supplements, it doesn't mean that they're not as powerful as regular drugs. I mean, they are drugs. The problem is that no one's looking after their safety or making sure that their claims are actually accurate. So please share our Facebook page with anyone that you think would find it interesting, and I will see you again next Wednesday at 6 o'clock. But before I go, let me tell you about those 4 topics that you get to vote on in the comment box after it is that I go away in a minute, okay? So the 4 topics that you get to choose from next time are: we could talk a little bit more about dementia, and specifically driving in dementia. I've gotten a lot of interest on a recent post about how to make that decision, how to talk to somebody that you care about who might be experiencing dementia, and you might be concerned, are they really safe to drive? So we could talk about that. We could also continue our discussion on social stigma in dementia. That is an issue that's really important to me. I would love the chance to talk to you more about that. We could also talk about sleep. Sleep is so interesting and it's so important, and it makes such a valuable contribution to brain health. the thing with sleep that's so cool is that one of the functions of sleep is to make memories, but it's also to forget memories. And I would love to be able to teach you a little bit about that. And the fourth one that we could talk about is, I might have to look at my notes for this one. Okay, we could also talk about heart health and how that equals brain health, okay? There's so much to be said about cardiovascular health and how it relates to the brain. We could have a really awesome in-depth discussion about that. Until I see you guys again, take care and check me out next time, next Wednesday at 6 o'clock. Bye-bye.